Welcome to Minions and Misfits, the family-friendly, off-kilter, actual play TTRPG podcast where, instead of your typical archetypal heroes, we play as anything besides that. And today, we are actually bringing you a new episode of Makers and Misfits, our every now and then interview show. In this case, we are interviewing Chris McDowell, who created Into the Odd, the game that you may know from our second season, the Neverland season. Uh, Personally, Cam, am a big fan of his. He's got his new game coming out that just got off Kickstarter, so we're really excited to sit down and ask him some questions about what he's been cooking up over there across the pond in jolly old England.
Yeah, I mean, if you like if you like tabletop RPGs, but you think D&D is really crunchy, then you really want to look into this guy, because Into the Odd, along with Electric Bastionland, Mythic Bastionland, are all kind of rules light, but still like really, I don't know how would you describe it, Cam. Like they're just really easy to get into without having to go through a million rule books.
Right. They are easy to pick up, but still have a lot of depth to them, especially Mythic Bastionland, as you'll find out from the interview. He's got a lot of new layers without really cluttering up the game. So it's very exciting to see what he's got going on.
Well, then, without further ado, I hope you enjoy our interview with Chris McDowell.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Makers and Misfits, our infrequent interview show. I'm Cam. I'm here today with Sam, and our special guest is Chris McDowell of Into the Odd fame, which you may remember as the game we played in season 2 of Minions and Misfits. He's here
Hello.
to answer some questions for us. How's it going?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good. Coming to us all the way from across the pond.
That's right. Yeah, I'm very. I know I should be used to this by now, but it's so strange seeing daylight in the back of your camera when it's the night here. I know this isn't new technology like time zones, but it still throws me off.
Well, we appreciate you being here with us, and I guess we'll jump in with some questions if you're ready to get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
For anybody who may not be familiar with your various games, give us a little rundown of your portfolio. Maybe give us a quick blurb on what you got going on.
So I guess the first game that I did that anyone might have heard of would be a game called Into the Odd, which is a very stripped back, rules light version of a game of going into weird places underground, usually, and trying not to die for with horrible monsters, but with a few twists on that kind of format. But rules light was kind of the mission with that one, if you like. And then since then, I've done a couple of follow-ups to that. So I've done Electric Bastionland, which takes the game from a kind of industrial era into a more urban adventure, early 20th century feel. And then I've also just completed the Kickstarter for Mythic Bastionland, which is the kind of the mythic history of this world. But because it's a strange world, you can actually walk into the mythic history if you know the right way to go. And yeah, those are the kind of the big three for me at the minute. I've also dipped into war games and things like that. But yeah, for RPGs, those are the big three.
We're pretty well acquainted with Into the Odd.
Sure.
Like in terms of odd places, like we've been crawling out of crocodiles. There's been a lot of weird things we've done in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect.
We definitely took the odd to heart when we played it. Maybe can you go into a little bit of detail about Mythic Bastionland, since that's your most recent project? As you said, it just left Kickstarter, so sort of what's got you excited about it? What's new?
So with, as I mentioned with Into the Odd, I wanted to make a game mainly to be used for like dungeon crawls, but I wanted to make it as light as possible because that's kind of where my preferences lay. And then with Electric Bastionland, I wanted to do the same for kind of urban adventures. So Mythic Bastionland is moving into sort of medieval hex crawl kind of play, which also has like generational play, domain management, all this stuff that you think has to be in these big very chunky rule systems and you need to have a long campaign to make the most of them, I tried to sort of condense them down into a game that you can play with very simple rules and hopefully get through a campaign quite quickly. So yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's a game about being a knight and going around and trying to sort of establish your legacy as a knight.
Right. Yeah. The generational play is definitely one of the aspects that I'm particularly interested in when it comes to Mythic Bastionland. I've never really played a game with that kind of where you can divide it up into ages, sort of like that. It sounds like it's going to be very fun. I can't wait to try it out myself.
That's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those ideas that I always liked the idea of, and Pendragon is sort of the famous game that does that. And but you know, the reality of it is, I don't have a group that would want to play Pendragon for 500 years of gameplay or 300 years, whatever it is. So as appealing as it is to do that thing where you play like one session is a year of the campaign, I wanted to try and speed it up because I'm also very impatient. So much of my design comes from being impatient, and I want to get to that. I want my character to die of old age within the next few weeks so we can be playing their heir and so on.
So is that kind of where the inspiration came from? It's actually funny you bring up Pendragon because one of our other co-hosts is dying to run that game, and so it makes me excited that you kind of have this kind of almost expedited, not version of it because it has a lot of its own advantages. But in addition to Pendragon, were there any other games that kind of inspired Mythic Bastionland, or kind of where was the root of the I guess inspiration? If that's kind of a weird way to phrase it, but do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, because I knew that I wanted the game. Well, the idea kind of came strangely out of one of the first COVID lockdowns over here. One of the few things we could do over here during the first lockdown, especially, was we could go for a walk. There's like a river near me that I can walk down, and there's like a little patch of woods that we can walk around. So we were walking in nature more than I've ever walked in my entire life when there was nothing else to do, and that kind of got me thinking about doing a game about I wanted more focus on travel. I wanted a bit of focus on kind of natural landscapes and like British mythology and things like that. But the way it sort of came together as a game, the big influences for me, other than like this idea of Pendragon, weirdly, this sounds like a really strange thing, but it was a few of the games that were based on Into the Odd that other people have written. I've stolen ideas from them. So they stole my ideas, so now I'm stealing them back for my game. And now I hope if they take it back, we can just keep feeding it back and forth. So
fair. It's only fair.
Yeah, so one of the big ones for me was a game called Runecairn, which is a game by Colin Lasser, which is this kind of, it's loosely based, well, it's based on Cairn, which is based on Into the Odd. And it is a game of essentially, it's kind of like Viking Dark Souls, really. And it puts this kind of nice little combat system on top of Into the Odd with some combat maneuvers and special abilities and things like that. And that got me thinking about how I would handle that sort of thing in a game with knights, because in Into the Odd, as you probably realize from your gameplay, you're kind of just a bunch of weirdos and losers. Like you might start with like a pot of grease and like some glue and some marbles, and like that's your equipment. But because I knew we were going to have knights as characters, I wanted them to feel a little bit more like they had some sort of martial skill to them, and you were making a few more decisions like that in combat. So yeah, I stole ideas from Runecairn for that shamelessly.
Yeah, I believe Sam's Into the Odd character, his starting loadout included a prosthetic leg, which we chose to interpret as he still has both of his legs, but he just carries around a prosthetic leg. Who knows where he got it from?
You'd be surprised that you're not the first person to tell me that. That's I feel like when that result comes up, it's like a 50-50 chance whether how they take it. Yeah, but that's what I like about those starter packages, is that it's not forcing you to, it's not making the decision for you. It's just putting the seed out there, and then it's up to you to interpret, well, does my character use a prosthetic leg, or am I just carrying one around like randomly?
Did I just acquire a prosthetic leg?
Yeah.
It really was perfect for us, because you talked about how we played weirdos, we're literally a podcast called Minions and Misfits. So it really was like right on the brand for
Yeah,
us.
it was a natural fit.
Yeah.
So as far as some of that new stuff that you've added in Mythic Bastionland, what's if you could pick one thing that you're most excited for, what would that be? What's one of your what's your baby mechanic? Which mechanic in Mythic Bastionland would you consider your baby?
Well, it's tricky because what I didn't want to do with it is that I didn't want to just add a load of new mechanics on top for the sake of it. So I tried to be restrained and still keep that kind of rules-like feel from Into the Odd and Electric Bastionland as well. But in terms of the thing that I've found most useful for the games I run, the way that you prepare the game. So with Into the Odd, it kind of comes with a sample dungeon at the back. But I wanted to try and make a system where preparing your own adventure was almost like a little game in itself for the GM. So there's a very simple procedure in the book for Mythic Bastionland where you're creating your hex map as the GM, sort of ahead of running the game, and it tells you, roll some random terrain, place it here, roll some random myths, scatter them around, roll some random landmarks. And it's been really cool to see how many people have said that they've just been going through this kind of like just as a fun little solitaire game almost, and sort of like generating this realm. And you can go as deep as you like to go, sort of rolling on a lot of these other random tables to determine who's the ruler in each of these areas and what's their relationship to each other. And it kind of feels almost like a little mini, like I say, a little solitaire game. And I think making prep feel less like a chore and more like a fun little game you can do on your own is something that certainly helps me get through it, because if I'm having to prepare for a game, I like to enjoy it rather than feel like it's work.
Yeah, I have certainly been spending some time with those hex map creating rules in the book there. I haven't finished my map yet, but I've got it pulled up in like a one of those Apple scrapbook.
Sure.
Or Collaborate, whatever it's called, the freeform app where you can you can zoom really far in and make the hex map, and then zoom really far out and just have details for each of the hexes written out to the side. It's a kind of a handy little way to create something.
Yeah, and that's the thing with having so the game is based around like having a hex map, like a sort of 12 by 12 grid normally, and I've prepared hex crawls before, and I feel like you can spend a lot of time preparing stuff that doesn't end up mattering, which can be fun in itself. I quite like filling in the blanks of a map, but it can sometimes end up being semi-wasted time. So the other thing that I'm really happy with Mythic Bastionland is the way that the myths work, which are your encounters. So each myth contains 6 omens, which are like little mini encounters that are all based around a certain theme, like it might be the goblin or the lich or the river or the forest. And just having those all in the book, like ready to go, is the other thing that because I obviously haven't tested all of them, because there's like 72 of these myths. So it's strange feeling like I'm kind of done writing the book, but now I've got to keep playing it until I've used every single one of those myths and sort of had them sort of emerge through play.
Yeah, just the sheer number of possibilities there, and same with all the different knights, is very exciting for me as somebody looking to GM this game, just because I like on my hex grid that I'm making, I have not even gotten around to rolling which myths are going to be there yet, so that there's still so much possibility for what's going to happen.
Sure. And like you said, the knights are the other thing, because with Electric Bastionland, I had 100 different character backgrounds, and it was always the question that kept coming up was people would say, okay, so I'm going to roll 5 characters for my players, and then I've got all these character backgrounds that aren't going to get used. And I would keep telling people, no, it says in the book you can use these characters for like NPCs. They can be inspiration for other stuff for your game. But I wanted to go further with that in Mythic Bastionland. So all the knights that you aren't using for your characters, for the players, will be like the rulers of the realm. which is another thing that's really useful to have. So you've got like a bank of NPCs in with all your character classes.
Right. So naturally, I think that leads to the question: is there an omen and a knight that you would consider to be your favorite out of the ones that you've written for the book?
It's a tough one. Let me have a look. I've been asked this before, and I try to answer this different each time so that there's no canonical answer.
Right.
I do like. I like the Bone Knight, which is kind of just on the edge of being a little bit silly, because even though this has a slightly more serious tone than Electric Bastionland, I still wanted to have some of that kind of playfulness that I've tried to put in that game. And the thing that I like about it is each knight has like a special ability, and I like putting special abilities that are going to make the player think, well, how am I going to make that useful? Like, it's good that some of them are just immediately obviously useful, but the Bone Knight has an ability which is when you trade a bone for a bone, you get to learn something about the individual that the acquired bone came from, or something that they knew in life. So you now have a reason to be that weird guy going around, and you have a box of bones as well. So you now have a reason to be the knight that goes around with a box of bones trying to find people to trade bones with.
Yeah.
Which it's good because it makes you into, like, you're almost like a weirdo Dark Souls NPC. Like that's the kind of thing that you would see like one of them doing. So I like the Bone Knight for that reason. The myths are difficult. There's a few in there that I am really happy with. I'm gonna say I noticed I like the Hydra, because so with Into the Yard and Mythic Bastionland, I've always tried to sort of avoid your sort of classic monsters like dragons and things like that. So for this game, because I knew I was making a more mythic kind of feel of a setting and more sort of medieval fantasy, it was really nice to be able to go back and sort of indulge in some of those classic monsters. And the Hydra, you kind of, this is a spoiler, I guess, but there's not really any way to hurt it or kill it. You can kind of fight it off a bit, but it will come back stronger each time, and it's you kind of just have to endure it, and then eventually it will kind of go away, which sounds very anticlimactic, but I think it's very different than what I think a lot of players are used to with a monster.
Oh yeah.
Where it's like, how do we kill this? Whereas now it becomes almost like, I don't know, like a Godzilla film or something, where it's like, we need to just like, how do we protect people from this thing and direct it away? Because we literally can't kill it, because it's part of its description that it can't be killed. So yeah, the Hydra is one that I'm pretty happy with there.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about the way that you wrote the myths, is they're all like, there's a wide variety of different situations. Like some of them, like the Hydra or the Goblin, sort of directly involve a single enemy, but then there are other ones, like there's one that's like the Tournament is one of them. There's a bunch that are just like situations or natural disasters or things like that.
Yeah.
And there are some where, like, when you're flipping through them, you're just like, well, how did he make that like something like an interesting situation? And then you start reading through the omens, you're like, oh wow, it's terrifying. The river is actually really scary.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's you were saying about building your realm, how you haven't rolled the myths yet, and you can roll them at random, and you'll end up with an interesting combination. But it's also quite nice to pick some. Like, I know that someone in the Discord server was talking about doing a almost like a Monster Hunter style campaign, and they were like, I'm just going to have the 6 biggest monster myths that I can. And so it's the ones like the Hydra and like the Serpent and the Wyvern and all these big monsters, and then all of a sudden this realm feels more like something out of like say like a Monster Hunter game. But you can also just have, some of them are just the plague, and it's just the plague, really. There's nothing kind of supernatural about it. And I think it's really interesting when you, because of the way that the myths work, is they'll kind of cross over as well. So you won't necessarily encounter the 6 omens of the Hydra from 1 through to 6 right after each other. You'll often get a bit of back and forth. So you might encounter an omen from the Hydra, and then an omen from the Wyvern, and then an omen from the Ogre. And because a lot of them are just like, a lot of the early omens are just sort of signs that the monster has been there. Like it might be like a smashed up building or something. You get this cool thing where players are trying to work out, wait, what is this connected to? Because like we've heard there's these 3 big monsters around, and we've just found this this crushed village, and it's like, well, let's try and CSI this and see if we can work out which monster actually lives near here.
There's 3 or 4 different things this could be.
Yeah, and of course the dream scenario is they manage to bring them all together to fight each other.
Right. let them fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's see. So we're getting close to our time here. So I guess my final question for you was going to be, what is another game that you are excited about right now, as far as things that you are interested in playing, things that have come out of the community that you're interested in right now? What's caught your eye?
There's a few actually, and because I've spent the last couple of years really quite vigorously running Mythic Bastionland, it's nice that I now have a bit of a gap to run some other games. I will mention a new game, but I want to say I'm going to be honest, and at the moment I'm running a Traveller campaign, which is very much not a new game. But that's a game that I've always wanted to try running a campaign of. I'm in the middle of preparing for running a game of Paranoia for the first time, which is exciting. And but in terms of new games, one that I think came out last year is a game called Fist, which is Freelance Infantry Strike Team, I think. And it's kind of like Metal Gear Solid plus like Hellboy plus like Saturday morning cartoons. It's such a gonzo tone to this like military, like A-team almost style thing where you're a military group. But the thing that I always remember is when I was sort of messing around with it, I rolled a few characters, and I think my first character I got was, you kind of roll 2 results from a huge random table of traits. It's like a D666 table, and the first character I got was a psychic sniper, which sounds great and sounds very Metal Gear Solid. But then the second character I got was a skeleton accountant. And it's the kind of game that means you have to try and make that work. You have to find a way to have it tonally work, and somehow it pulls it off. So that's a game called Fist. It's by Claymore, and it's I think it's out now. Yeah, I've received my Kickstarter copy, so I think they are out in the wild now, and that's something I'd love to run this year.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like, who was in charge of Foxhound's accounting? Now we can find out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Every good campaign needs an accountant. It's just a rule. Come on.
Yeah, and why not a skeleton? Yeah,
absolutely. What like D&D adventure group is complete without an accountant?
Right. It's one of the things I enjoy about the Acquisitions Incorporated materials for D&D is because they include jobs like an accountant, like it's like an arithmancer or something like that. It was just an accountant.
Sure.
Or one of them is called the documancer. It's just the person who's in charge of all the paperwork. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you getting on with us to answer a few questions, and we're super excited to run some Mythic Bastionland, so I hope you'll tune in when we do.
Absolutely.
We enjoyed Into the Odd a lot, so definitely looking forward to working the other 2 games into our rotation somewhere.
That's great. I hope it lives up to Into the Odd.
I'm sure it will. I have high hopes.
Thank you again. This has been awesome.
Yeah, this has been great.
Thanks for having me on.
Is there anything you'd like to plug before we take off?
I mean, if anyone's interested in any of my games, if you go to bastionland.com, they're all there in the sidebar. Into the Odd is out now, and Mythic Bastionland is taking pre-orders for shipment towards the middle of this year.
Oh, since you mentioned Bastionland.com, I have to go ahead and add in that I really like. I've been following your blog posts. I really liked reading your thoughts on game design and all your little bits of odd apocrypha as well. Those are
Oh,
always
great,
very
yeah.
enlightening.
Oh, great, thank you. I'm glad that people still read the blog because I worry that at some point blogs are going to. I mean, I think they've already fallen out of fashion, but I feel like they're lingering, threatening to make a comeback now. So I'm trying to keep blogs alive.
Yeah, it feels like with the not so slow downslide of Twitter that the TTRPG community is starting to take back to the blogosphere,
Sure,
as it
yeah,
were.
yeah.
No, but yeah, we really appreciate you coming on with us. Thanks for answering our questions, and hopefully we'll catch you later sometime.
Cheers. Thank you very much.